Hi, welcome to the NAPE YouTube site. My name is Mike Aylan and I'm the chair of NAPE. Now this video was prepared from the seminar I should have presented at the Expo show Childcare and Education at Olympia in March. But unfortunately, because of the pandemic, it was cancelled. Now, the title of my seminar was The Future of Primary Education. And it was in various parts. The first part was thinking about what a primary education would look like, what sort of skills a leadership team in a primary school would need to have to affect change, and to explain the vision and mission in primary schools. So actually it's quite a wide brief. Now obviously I'm going to bring forth my experience and perspective of how I feel primary schools in the future would be, and it's a little bit like looking into a crystal ball. So here's a crystal ball up here. Everybody who watches YouTube brings their own perspectives into it, so I'm hoping my perspectives of this seminar I'll be presenting will match yours. If they don't, I apologise, and I look forward to reading your comments below on the YouTube site. Now if you're interested in NAPE at all, then please click on subscribe and notify so you can see more of the same videos, mainly based around school and videos to support teachers. Thank you for watching. Here are the three themes that I shall be talking about. The first line refers to your primary school provision. I think the word compelling overstates the word vision, when actually it's asking how you feel the direction your schools should take. The second line now refers to team, so a collective view of the future. Lasting and outstanding culture is the hope that the right vision will be created. The difference between vision and mission would seem self-evident, but I will simply spell out the differences in this presentation. First, I thought I would reflect with you the journey in time primary education has travelled before we talk about the future. In the last 110 years, we know there have been mass societal changes. This stems from three industrial revolutions. That is, the invention of the steam engine, science itself, mass production and the digital age, notwithstanding 2 world wars. The Victorian era reminds us of payment by results and of huge classes taught by older pupil teachers, as they were called. The 1970 Elementary School Act increased the mandatory attendance of children aged between 5 to 13 years of age from 68% to 82%. The Edwardian period, the king being King Edward VII, reminds us that little has changed, although there was a recommendation by the Education Act 1918 that children over the age of 11 should be taught separately. The Haddow Report of 1931 recommended the end of pupil teachers and for the training of uncertified teachers. This is an unusual photograph seemingly taken in World War II. The mandatory Free School Milk Act wasn't passed until after the war in 1945. Free milk and meals had actually been distributed by some local authorities since the 1906 Education Act, known as Provision of Meals Act. Now, free school milk was a hugely contentious issue in the 1970s, and that is because the Secretary of State for Education, Margaret Thatcher, had actually authorised the end to free school milk for children over the age of 7. She was called Thatcher the Milk Snatcher. 1959 heralded the Ministry of Education's Handbook for Teachers working 2,500 new primary schools built after the war, following the famous 1944 Education Act, otherwise known as the Butler Act. This act opened new opportunities for working class children because it ended the fees the general public had to pay for secondary education. The government report Half Our Future 1963, made a number of recommendations, including the raising of the leaving age of pupils from 14 to 16 and the use of mixed ability grouping in classes. The computer era has now started. The government encouraged their use with grants and parents' encouragement through fundraising efforts. In 1987, the Department for Trade and Industry provided funding of £3.5 million to support the purchase of school IT equipment managed by LEAs. This went towards microcomputers, disk drives, printers, mice and monitors. This funding continued for a number of years. In that decade also saw the milestone Warnock Report of 1981. She was later known as Baroness Warnock. This gave rise to the Education Act of 1981 for special educational provision in schools. The 1988 Act gave every child a de jure a right to attend almost any school in the country. In 1988, the national curriculum was introduced in all state schools in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, prescribing what children should be taught to ensure each pupil is given the same standard of education. Now, the Office for Standards in Education, Ofsted, was formed under the Education Schools Act of 1992, and this was part of the major overhaul and centralisation of the school system, which included extensive testing in schools and publication of league tables. The Education Act 1988 fundamentally changed the relationship between the Department of Education and Science and the local educational authorities in England and Wales. It followed the pattern of giving central government more legal powers and reducing local authorities' discretion to set policy. Uniforms in schools have had a varied career. For instance, children at charitable schools in the 19th century often wore uniforms provided by the parish. Some schools in the late 20th century saw this as part of the marketing of the school, together with the school website and prospectus. The Special Educational Needs Code of Practice, Department for Education 1994, further required schools to document the support children received. This photograph does little to reflect the huge amount of changes that occurred post-national curriculum in 1988. This brought a sharp focus on standards in schools and value for money, coupled with a multitude of statutory instruments schools need to follow to this day. Does this photograph convey the future of primary schools? We need to ask ourselves. The Daily Mail reports that pupils at a primary school in Devon are being taught in supersized classrooms where a single teacher oversees 67 pupils in one lesson. However, I can see 2 members of staff at the back. Notice the prevalence of laptops. Now, I asked a few exhibitors at the Schools and Academies show at Birmingham's NEC last October about their view of how primary schools could change for the future. Now, obviously it's their view. What is your view? The National Account Manager for Epsom UK. Tell me, Dave, what's your vision of the primary school of the future? Well, if you were a grandparent looking forward in time, hopefully, what would you expect? How would you expect primary schools in the future to develop?
Oh, interesting question.
Yeah.
I think the thing that what I'd really like is for my grandchildren to be able to articulate what they're doing and what they're learning. Sometimes my children are doing it and learning it, but struggle to explain to me
what they've been doing every day.
They've been doing, yeah. And so and maybe that's about my questioning technique, but
could be
for them to be able to articulate what they're doing and be really great communicators.
I'm talking to Graham Scott, who is representing Playtime by Forms. Have I got that right?
Yeah, that's all right.
Yes,
yeah.
I have. And I'm going to ask Graham his opinion about what primary schools in the future should be delivering to their pupils. So,
I think
as a
my
parent,
thoughts
for instance. Yeah.
As a parent, I think that the key thing going forward is going to be physical activity. and physical challenge for the children. I think it's going to be a great emphasis, even more so than we're seeing today, in terms of getting the children outside, getting them active, getting them interacting with nature, being aware of their surroundings. I think we've got to make sure that we're keeping away and a balance of the TV and the video games, and making sure that they're kind of outside and they're kind of aware, and that physical activity and challenge as well is very important for them in terms of their development.
Speaking to Stuart Hale, CEO, Wand Education. So as a parent, what are your expectations as your child goes through primary school, in terms of how the primary school develops?
Do you know what? The interesting thing is technology in primary schools, because there's been a general slight backlash against swipe and play and iPads, etc. And and as a parent and as a technologist, I'm getting pulled two ways. Kids need to know how to use technology. I mean, for instance, my son can go onto an iPad if he's interested in black holes. He can pull down a video of how a spacecraft moves across the event horizon and what it would look like. That's great. We'll never do that.
Crystal ball gazing is not a recommended way of generating a vision. Here are an example of two vision statements I found, which are typical of the statements found on primary school websites up and down the country. These two schools' vision statements may seem quite different, but do underline their aspirations for the future. Typically, the statements are in general terms. Therefore, a vision statement outlines what a school wants to achieve in the future. Words like aim are often used. Such statements reflect a school's philosophy about how children best learn, children's behaviour towards others, and what their attitudes to learning should be. It specifies an approach or a set of values. So this is the school's publicly stated ambition for all of its pupils. On the other hand, a mission statement describes what a school wants to do now to move towards that vision. These statements provide the motor or power to help realise future aspirations of the school. A mission statement, therefore, acts like a mirror or foci, clarifying for everybody where the school is and where it's going. A school is not unresponsive to the community it serves or to changes in society or government legislation. So for that to happen, it has to be dynamic and organic, grows with the school. A school development plan often refers not only to the standards it needs to achieve and how to do that, but maybe also final alterations to the vision and mission statements as it moves along. This slide serves to illustrate how the vision drives the mission to hopefully a successful outcome in the future. These statements can contain keywords that reflect a value-based approach to education at school, such as respect, resilience, empathy, and reflection. Finally, we have an example of school putting future and present intentions together. This is not unusual. The school is aiming to be inclusive, ambitious, and innovative, while stating that it is doing just that. Therefore, my conclusion is that mission statements indicate how the school is working towards their stated vision. So you might ask yourself, where do schools start? What strategies can they use? Well, one strategy is called a SWOT analysis. SWOT standing for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. Now, we might want to use SWOT analysis, but let's not forget that schools are getting very good at reviews in providing reports to Ofsted and other parties. The strengths of a school are celebrated and the weaknesses are being addressed is a typical review. SWOT analysis has been a shorthand way of identifying what the school needs to tackle to achieve its aspirations and so vision in, say, for instance, raising standards of learning or improving children's well-being. Collecting those sorts of views and therefore that data from a cross-section of the school community helps to inform that process. It can also inform the vision of the school as it identifies where future aspirations children, parents and governors may lie. This data can then be aligned and added to the professional vision of the staff and head teacher. The last couple of slides has enabled us to look at mission and vision statements and the relationship between them. We've also looked at a strategy that schools can use to identify strengths and weaknesses, and how indeed those findings can then be put into the vision and then to the mission statements. Clearly, the leadership team is going to be responsible to identify mission objectives subject to local constraints such as Ofsted recommendations, and then how they're linked to vision statements, and then how they can be communicated to interested parties. On the slide it states leadership skills. When we talk about leadership skills, we need to understand that they are tools, behaviours and capabilities that indeed a team member needs to have in order to be able to succeed in motivating and directing others. There is plenty of literature out there for you to read about leadership skills, and now I'm going to move on to leadership behaviours or styles. Leadership styles and leadership skills are indeed two very different things. You could almost describe leadership styles as a particular behaviour in the way that somebody leads, and can be said to be linked to the personality trait that person has. However, I'm going to restrict myself to a well-known piece of established research about leadership theory, which I would actually argue is still relevant today. Firstly, we have a leadership style where there's a balance between people and task, a balance between concern for people on the vertical axis and concern for task. The second shows a greater concern for people and less concern for task. And of course, the third line shows the opposite. Now, the next slide shows a grid in greater definition between concern for people and concern for production. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, but you can immediately see that laissez-faire is showing a low concern for both people and for production. Country club, obviously, a high concern for people and low concern for production. And so it goes on until you get to the bottom right corner where you have a high concern for production, a very low concern for people, and that could be known as produce or perish. If you remember, I talked about the relationship between vision and mission. I also talked about the dynamic and organic nature needed as vision and mission statements change. The one leadership style that can adapt to change successfully is a transformative leadership style. This displays a number of important skills. Therefore, a transformative style of leadership exercise by school leaders can steer teachers to adapt to these future changes. The characteristics of a transformative leadership style prioritises the professional capacity of the team. It attends to followers' needs for achievement and growth, whilst personally interacting with its followers. Therefore, transformative leadership inspires, provides intellectual stimulation, influences, and provides individual attention to staff. How can we identify leadership skills? Well, leaders need to have superlative interpersonal skills and professional knowledge. They need to have the ability to inspire, motivate, and communicate very well, and be determined and certainly be persistent. Can you think of any other skills? Comments below. Now, this teacher talks about her leadership approach. Okay. Well, Sharon, thank you very much indeed for agreeing for this short interview about your leadership style today. Could you tell me a little bit about your school and your position in the school?
I came as a head teacher at this school in January. So This is my very first term. So it's a one form entry lower school, year R through to year 4.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. So quite a few challenges. You're taking over from a head teacher who's been established over quite a few years, and obviously you have your own particular style. Could you take us through what sort of changes and how you've involved people in those changes?
Yes, I have. Yeah, so it's always difficult because change is difficult and people panic and people worry, and so you try to scaffold people as much as you can in order to help them with the changes. So we've had 2 really positive whole staff meetings at the beginning of the year, which we're now calling professional development meetings. So straight away there's a change. Yes. Because it's a different style, because professional development meetings denote that we're going to be learning, we're going to be training, we're going to be looking at pedagogy, we're going to be looking at systems, we're going to be looking at our next steps really in order to improve. So there's a different focus under that heading.
Well, that's very useful. And have you had to sort of put in some sort of efficiency savings as well in terms of where people, staff are deployed?
We have. You've had a little look at the timetable. We had some sort of like what are called grey areas of the timetable where people weren't quite sure where they should be or who they should be with. So we've looked at the need of the children in the year groups, and so we've then looked at our support staff and made sure that staff are deployed at the point of need rather than the I'm a year 2 support.
Yes.
I am here to support all the children, and the most need at this time of the day is here. So this is where I'm going to be. So the timetables would change. And
so you're moving the school into the future. What sort of initial reactions have you had from, say, parents as well as staff?
Some staff really positive, really, let's do it, let's move on. Some people realise that it's, we're going forward now. We need to look at different rewards and things that are rewarding the children.
Well, it looks to me as if this school's got a very bright future under your leadership. Thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure.
This final slide is called Endgame, and I've put together a list of 5 particular issues that face schools, primary schools today and probably in the future as well. I'm grateful to John Coe, our founder member, for his advice. The first one is called the assessment train. Now, as we know, the government have led drives on standards since 1988. Now, that leads schools into a dilemma between those children who do or do not have a good head start in learning when they start school. This present assessment regime exacerbates this divide rather than addresses it. Ofsted moved to support some schools with long-term standard issues, which is a good thing, but it doesn't take away the dilemma between those children who have a good head start and those who don't. The second issue is about curriculum change. This is about how assessment is the tail that wagged the dog, you might say. Narrowing the curriculum to basics, narrowing it to those subject areas which are assessed and those which are not. Ofsted has tried recently to address that issue. It may be a case of a little too late for our present school generation. Parental partnership or pressure. Now, we know that research shows that parents feel there is too much pressure on children taking SATs. And in fact, NAPE has been quite vocal about this for some time. On the other hand, parents appear to be choosing a school for their children by looking at SATs results as well as Ofsted reports. The fourth bullet point refers to what kind of skills do we need to finish children in primary school leading on to secondary school in the future. What do we want for the next generation of the workforce? Are we talking intellectual? Are we talking about collaborative skills? Are we talking about well-reasoned, independent, creative thinking? Or indeed, are we thinking about all of the above? This is vitally important as we move to a technology-driven work environment needed for production and administration. The final bullet point, the future must include, it really must include a much wider curriculum than we've got at the moment, and moving away from the fear of failing in tests that children have to endure. because we know at the moment that too many children need reassurance and counselling. We believe the future should use embedded basic skills. We accept that. But they need to be used in the wider context, in humanities, art and music, for example. The primary school in the future should be a happy, celebratory seat of learning. We believe in that very strongly. We also believe at NAPE that the teacher class system should be celebrated, as it creates that and vital mutual growth of understanding between teacher and child for a year or more. Because in that climate, the positive partnership between schools and families can flourish. Thank you for listening.